Hi, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. We are here, Tamara and I, and we are here with Martin Bell from Urban Systems, the CEO, and we're going to talk today about sort of what you do and what you're seeing in the market. And so we're going to give you the floor. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'm the CEO at Urban Systems. It's a company that started Kamloops in Kelowna in 1975 and bought out the founders, a group of us, about 20 years ago or so. And so it's an employee-owned company, so we're looking to sort of grow our people and ultimately have them participate in ownership and sell parts of it to them as we go. And that's part of the transition plan longer term, is that people are around for the long haul, kind of intergenerationally. So we're not family members, but people would stay together
and like a family.
Mm-hmm, kind of, yeah.
Consistently, you're ranking. You're named in the top places to work.
Yes,
Urban Systems. Tell us about that if you can.
Yeah, so for a lot of years, I mean, when the company was smaller and it had been in BC and Alberta, it was just, especially when you go through the boom years in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, it was just for having your name out for recruiting and otherwise at universities. And we've got a lot of kids who are civil engineers or otherwise are coming out of the different schools and urban planners and landscape architects. It's tough just competing against some of the public companies. And so we did feel we had something unique to offer on the staff side and the employment side. And we started to participate in some of the surveys through the Globe and Mail and otherwise. And had been on their survey with the Globe and Mail and the Great Places to Work Institute, and we had made their top 100 list for 15 years in a row. So it's been great.
Has anyone else ever done that?
Nope. No. There are a couple of firms I think now that are getting closer to it. I think Habanero, which is a technology company in Vancouver, consultancy, they're very close and they rank highly, and we're fortunate enough to get to work with them. So there's a couple others that are consistently there, and so I think the big thing for us is just to keep pushing to be a great workplace, and it's a good accountability.
That's amazing. Love that. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about Urban Systems? What do you do?
Sure. Yeah, we work in consulting with cities and indigenous governments, indigenous communities, and provincial governments as well. And so across, mostly from Ontario West. And so we've got offices in 16 cities. And And so, we work in the spectrum of things that you'd see in different cities, from highways and road design. You'd see things like urban planning new communities and places in Alberta, and otherwise we're working on fairly major land development projects in places like Calgary and Edmonton, right through the prairies as well into Saskatoons and Winnipegs and Northern Ontario right now. So we also work on bigger design build highway work. So you'd see that pretty much across Canada, where you're working on large highway projects, large interchange, and other projects like that too. Yeah, LRT and those kind of things. Yeah.
Wow. So you must see just such a difference between each community, road structure, employment, everything.
Yes.
Across the country.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean,
have you got 4 hours to talk to us?
Yeah. No.
Like, okay, this is so good.
Well, you're both so involved in this, and I think just the migration, I think through COVID, of people moving to communities or lifestyle communities and being able to work at a distance, that certainly impacts you as a workplace. But even with clients too, where they become more adept at working across technology, where they used to need to physically be somewhere all the time. So I think being in the community certainly matters. Like, being local does matter a great deal. You can't do some of this stuff at a distance. You do need to understand the local context. And that's becoming more and more important. But just the technology side of things is it's really augmented your ability to bring colleagues to the table. But yeah, definitely a lot of differences, and you're seeing marked changes. I think you've had a lot of growth, obviously, here in the Okanagan, but markets that had been quieter, like Calgary would be one where it's really, really lost 2 years, especially. I mean, they probably had two of our busier years in our office in the last, probably since the 1985, really. So it's been there since the early 80s. And so it's really, really been busy, and just a lot of things had stopped or people were quite tentative. And the investment side is picking up. People are moving back there. The technology industry is starting to grow there. Obviously, taxes and office space is plentiful there, and so there's just a real magnet for people moving from other cities, even in the U.S. and those kind of things. So differences in the markets, but there's sort of some neat things emerging that are quite healthy. We'll see with the Bank of Canada's interest rate increases today. Sort of that'll have a pretty marked impact, pretty quickly, we think, on some of the residential side for sure. But things like industrial, you're seeing that grow here just with BD's investment at the airport. And seeing that a bit of everywhere with logistics and otherwise, is just being able to move things through, whether it's Amazon or those kind of things. But there's big investment happening in that across Canada right now.
Wow.
So what city center would you see that you're seeing the most growth right now? Is that a question you can answer? Is that?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Definitely, I think you'd see it. I mean, you might expect it's just a lot of the lifestyle type of oriented communities, and you're seeing a lot of growth here. But you'd see a lot of growth in, places like Victoria or on the island, around Nanaimo. You're seeing a lot of growth in the Courtenay Comox, kind of that area too, at a much higher level than we've seen in my 25 years of doing this. Plus, it's really shifting quite a bit on that front. And some of the markets that had a bit more out migration, I think like with Calgary and Edmonton, there had been like, the growth for years and years and years to move there and work had stopped, post 2014 with the oil price crash. And so the reality, though, is that that's now picking up again as people are moving there from elsewhere to work. And
we've had a lot of people actually so far this year, the first quarter of 22. We've had a number of people who, young people in their 30s and maybe early 40s who are cashing out, selling here and going where there is some opportunity.
Huge trend. Like you're seeing that in Calgary. A number of the development clients we work with, they've got people moving from Ontario, people moving from Vancouver. Just sort of the equity side and actually cashing out. The price of housing, the average price of housing, I mean, it was at one point last year was close to probably half of what it was here for single family home. You're in the 500-ish range and you're close to $1 million here. So people and taxes and otherwise, so those considerations, but just an ability to work at a higher level and actually have a place to live. And, I think there's a lot of housing choice in a lot of those communities as well. And I think that provides a lot more span for people to live there and work, and especially for younger families. We did that too. We moved there, when we were young to go out and build a career, and spent time working both in Calgary and Edmonton for a lot of that reason, really, just employment opportunities, just different opportunities for housing and those kind of things. So it sort of seems to be coming full circle in some ways.
Wow. Now, how many employees, how many people work with your company, with Urban Systems?
We have 600 full-time employees. Yeah. And so, and adding quite a few kind of each year, but it's built out like a professional practice. It's a bit more like a law firm. So you don't have big departments, but you have practice group leaders that actually hire teams. And some of them are quite young. And so they're actually building their teams out across the markets in the different cities in Canada. Yep.
And do you, work in office space with everyone? Does everybody come into an office and work, or are you working, people able to work from home, or how is that with your company?
For sure. Yeah, no, well, we were studying this because we do have offices in all the markets that we're in. And so we really wanted to be in interesting places because it's a big recruitment advantage that, when you're in certain spots, and with professionals, especially, a lot of them will live, they want access to things like the train and access to amenities, as you might imagine. And cycling facilities are huge, like in a lot of the cities, is people ability to bike to work. And so that's true of every community. I hear that often. Well, it snows a lot here in Winnipeg or otherwise, and there snows a lot here and we don't cycle, but people do. And people choose to work for you when you're in good spots on that front. And I appreciate the city's investing in it because it gives us a big draw employment wise. But we were flexible before. So we always allowed people to work at a distance with clients. Some of our colleagues that need a break, they go and work at Starbucks, to do other things that obviously shifted with the pandemic. Yeah. But we had all the technology and other things in place for that before. And so we just, at the start of the pandemic, we just said, work where you feel safest and work where you can make good decisions for your family's health. And we'll leave the offices open and we'll clean them, we'll reorganize them. You can work here, you can work at home, you can continue kind of down your path. And so definitely seeing, as you're seeing places in the US with a walk index in different cities like New York, Chicago, where it's starting to kind of increase. Yes. Some of our offices have been pretty busy for quite a while. People really have kind of come together. They've reorganized them and they feel that they can operate them safely. Yeah. But others they're getting back to what I would consider normal in terms of people. There's just a bit more, the hybrid thing is a bit more dynamic. So people have had to figure out their teams a bit more and how to work together across that space. So, and
I think people have missed the camaraderie that you have. I know we're certainly seeing that in our space and the agents wanting to come together and you pick up ideas and energy and you get motivated and excited. So I think after 2 long years, it's nice to get back to being together and having that synergy. So.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We had an event, like a corporate, like our staff event in all the offices that's simulcast. So you're not having separate ones in each office, but they had framed it around going back to summer camp. When you're going to summer camp, you see the kids that you saw last year, or the ones that you see kind of each year.
Oh, I love that.
They framed it around that because of everybody kind of coming back into the same space. And so it was pretty epic in all the offices. People were very keen to be there, and they're still trying to follow a lot of the health and safety things as much as they could. But it was really interesting just to see everybody. The energy level, the buzz was huge, and people that probably had been, a bit more cautious, a bit more reluctant to be there, they really were back in the office. And so it was cool to see that. And so, and that's just, trend wise, you're seeing it's picking up every week. So, which has been great, but people were missing that connection with each other, and screens, as great as they are, they don't replicate the depth of relationship that you have, that you would have with your clients and otherwise, where it really is often built by the time and the interaction with them. So,
It'll be interesting to see as time goes on and COVID becomes more, hopefully, of something in the past, if we're going to see a bit of a shift. I mean, we had lots of clients move here because of the lifestyle that the Okanagan provides. And a lot of people decided, well, this is great. I can still work my Vancouver job because I can work remotely. And I wonder if we'll start to see a shift of that, of those companies now saying, hey, actually, I want you back into the office. And that pull to those big city centers might come.
Yes.
I wonder.
We are seeing some of that happen. I think what you're seeing, though, too, is that, with both globalization and other forces, that people are saying, I'm not going back to that. So I was working there. I've moved here. I really love it. I made a home here. I want to be here. You're not as beholden to this local market, though. You can actually have, and a lot of them can work in other places. And so they're, with the labor shortage that we're facing, I mean, that's a major thing, like whether you're in trades or whether you're in professional services or sales or otherwise, there's a labor shortage in all of them. There's a human shortage across the board. And so that balance of power has shifted to employees, very much so. And so I think a lot of them have a lot more ability to say, no, you know what, I'm not moving back to Vancouver, or I'm not moving back to Toronto. I'm going to be here, and I'm going to actually organize myself to work for a company that allows me to do that. So we think that's going to be a big recruitment advantage, is just being flexible that way, and finding a path for your teams to set their own rules of engagement with each other rather than the employer setting those rules. So
wow, I love that.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, interesting. And so what do you foresee with Kelowna's market? Like what sort of things are you noticing when you compare to these other city centers that are so big and vast and have grown tremendously over time? Kelowna still, I mean, for all of us, it's big. It's grown a lot in the last few years, but I think the projection is still to grow, a lot more. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can't remember what the number is specifically. I mean, by 2040, though, it was another 40,000 or 30 to 40,000 people. Which is big growth in a community that in the city itself proper, I think, is about 140 some odd thousand. And so that's a lot of new residents. I think a couple things here. I mean, you're certainly seeing it densify, and I think that's a normal course thing that you'd see in Vancouver or other places. I'm not comparing Kelowna to Vancouver. It's just the land base is limited here by lake, by mountains, by the agricultural land reserve, and otherwise. And it cannot sprawl out. Well, it can, I guess. It's just that we have the cost of transportation and other things that start to really impact things. But to a degree, it can't really sprawl out at that level. And so you are seeing stuff. I think the town center node thing is something they started planning here 30 years ago. It was the 1990s. They planned for Pandosi's and and I'm grateful that they've done that, because it's enabled a lot of the investment that you're seeing, in the community, to allow for different types of product to come to market. Yeah. I think with RU7, the city itself has been pretty innovative in testing. How do we go from one big sort of post-war lot to 4, on one lot, and actually have 4 families be able to live there. So I just appreciate there's a focus on innovation. It's not all going to be right or perfect, but that they're trying. They're trying to sort of figure out how we're going to make this livable for that number of people. And so,
and it's a real shift. I think certainly when we were growing up, people wanted a big house and a big yard and a white picket fence. And when we look at that RU7 zoning, and when they first came out with it, we thought, or I certainly thought, that would appeal to investors, somebody who would put 4 units on a lot and rent them all out. And instead, we're seeing, young millennials who are just happy to get into a home where they've got their own little piece of grass. They don't have a strata fee. They don't need much. They actually don't want the huge home and the huge lot.
That's right.
And then the young baby boomers, they're in their 60s or 70s, but they want to walk to everything.
Yes.
They have one car. They do ride their bikes for groceries and all of that. And it really is shifting. It's really nice to see that densification.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's definitely coming. And I think that's actually it has been very encouraging. I think people are shifting how they live, as you're saying. I mean, I just even look in the architectural forms here. You've got more modern homes, but you've got the upper levels that are actually built where they're not having yards, where they're having a deck up top, a third story that looks out on the lake or looks out into their neighborhood or otherwise. And so that shifted a lot. I don't think people want the grand swath of green grass is not kind of the beacon of success anymore. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people look at it as a bit of a millstone around their neck, is just, how do we do this without having that? And how do we entertain people and have outdoor space, but it's maybe not a yard? And so just those preferences are shifting. And some of it is generational. I think, as you're saying, baby boomers definitely, want to be able to turnkey and go. But I think younger people are realizing, why are we maintaining these lawns, or why are we doing this? And there's a lot of questioning of some of those norms of that. But I think the bigger shifts are going to be things that are more long-standing, like the white picket fence is the aspirational measure of success. That's something as a society where, it's changing dramatically just because of the cost of land and the affordability issues. But it's something that we're going to actually have to have a bigger, broader understanding. Like being housed is a measure of success on its own. It's not about having this exact type of housing product.
Yes, good point. Really good point.
Yeah. So that's something I appreciate about the city, though. They're really working hard. UDI, the development community here, they're working hard together to find how do we broaden the spectrum of what's available. So it's not just, historically, you go back to the 90s, there was a lot of single family, salmon colored stucco,
So true. Well, and the huge front yards. I know we've had a lot of houses that we've lived in, and a great deal of those had this massive front yard that you didn't ever go in. No. You mowed it, you watered it, you did all of that work and effort for your neighbors to drive by on their way to their homes with the big front yard.
True.
Yeah.
And, I know with your home, you guys created a great space to have an area in or out of the sun, depending on the season, and utilizing that. It's nice to see because that was the big marker of success.
That's right. That's right. I think part of it too is just, we've gone through that, we've often talked about it. I think they're trying to get away from it in Calgary where it was the 2-car garage with attached house, it's, not detached single family. And so making the front, whether it's yard or whether you've got a patio, I think a lot of the houses now they're building 2 lot lines or close to them. It's much more engaged with the street. I mean, that's where people are walking, and we're seeing a lot more walking and cycling, and the city's investing a lot more in both of those things to connect commercial areas and hopefully schools soon, that we don't have all the drop off and pickup going on, that kids can get back to riding safely and parents feeling like they're going to be safe and having that sort of separated infrastructure that's good for kids, but it's good for seniors as well. And it's coming. I mean, you can see it starting to connect the different networks here. And it's one of those things that, we hope when you advocate or lobby or help, agitate as business owners too, to the city of like, please advance this and please advance grant funding to the province to obtain more money to keep going on that stuff, because it really does make the city more livable.
Absolutely. Well, and it's, again, like we were talking about people going back and working in offices. Yeah. I think it gives a sense of connectivity and community, truly community, instead of driving in, your garage door closes and no one knows if you're home or not.
That's right.
That's where you see a little more theft or a little, I'd like to get back to the, sharing with your neighbors, knowing who your neighbors are. I think that builds a better community.
That's right.
What cities are you seeing, Martin, just given that you travel so much and you're in other places, who's doing it really well? Where could Kelowna learn from?
Yeah, well, I think Kelowna's definitely looked upon. I mean, it's probably, it might be surprising to people, it might not be, but it's definitely a community that gets studied externally. Like they actually have been very progressive on things like carriage homes or, things like, those types of secondary suites, allowing those as a right by zoning rather than requiring, places, in Calgary had gone through for years is if you wanted to have a secondary suite, you had to go to council to get an approval, which is a massive consumptor of time and risk and money and otherwise. And the city here, that's a lot of years ago that went forward, right? And so there's a series of things. I think the RU7 is very innovative. That's not. I mean, you're seeing other countries that are actually legislating that to happen because it's not moving forward. And so there's a lot of other communities do study Kelowna for sure, and just
interesting.
And so the other things though too is where things are moving forward is where the cities are quite invested in. It's like process improvements. So you often hear the thing on the media about red tape and otherwise, and that's not really been my experience in a lot of communities. The staff are working hard. They might be overwhelmed because they don't have enough people working there when the development is scaling up to that degree. But I think there's some really interesting kind of infill stuff going on in Calgary that you sort of see densification in some of the neighborhoods that are really improving. Edmonton as well. They've been working on that for a number of years to kind of perfect that. And I think they had some fits and starts to start, but it's really changing the housing form. So a lot of them, I think, are taking their cues from each other, and hopefully, that is expedited. You're seeing these other forms get built, and people go, "Whoa, that's really kind of neat. Maybe we should consider that here too." So there's definitely, they do compare notes between the cities and really work to learn from each other, but it's kind of the finer tentacles of things like the pedestrian connections or your ability to walk for groceries. That stuff, I think the city here too, is when you go into do things where you're actually doing permitting or approvals where they give you a walkability score. This neighborhood's walkability is X. And so therefore we, those are neat things. Like those are things that didn't used to happen. They didn't really consider those things. They weren't really a big deal. They didn't really factor into the process as much, but it is a big deal now. And it's just neat to see that being considered. So,
that's a good point. So another question is because you've got such a wealth of experience and knowledge, what do you see forecasting for Kelowna? Like if you could take your magic ball and go, this is what I see in 2040, if we talk about, what the new OCP goes to.
Yep.
What do you foresee?
Well, I think that the things that have been really fascinating is just seeing the acceleration of growth in places like the downtown core. You're seeing the interest in market growth in Pandosy, Rutland as well. I was just out on like Highway 33 and just seeing the level of redevelopment and what's possible. You've got big institutional forces driving here as well. So you've got things like the hospital, you've got things like the airport. UBCO is still growing like crazy and still so much potential on that front too. So there's a lot of forces that are different than they were. I mean, the hospital was very small, almost bordering on rural, 20 years ago.
Yes.
And it's a massive employer now as well. And even places government wise, like the city and they're big employers, 1,000 different people working there and otherwise. And so there's a lot of employment stability in the market, like public sector that did not exist at that time. And so that provides a bit of a platform, I think, for growth on that front. But you've got people that are moving here, certainly younger people, for all of us who've got kids, and those wanting to stay here, housing choice and affordability at scale is going to be really, really important. And so hoping the discussions about the missing middle and otherwise about smaller form housing and more kind of whether it's micro or other opportunities to kind of work your way into the market where we used to, 30 years ago, you'd buy a place in the North End or around the hospital or Rutland or otherwise, and you'd build sweat equity by putting that in. Not so easy to do that anymore without,
True.
bank of parents or other people participating in that. And so having more housing opportunities will matter quite a bit. I'm very curious. We'll see what happens with inflation. We'll see what happens with the Bank of Canada, the changes here and otherwise. Like we're coming out of the COVID boom, I think in some respects too, where people who weren't spending money, and it isn't all about government transfers, it's bigger than that. People started going, wow, I was deferring this forever. And why am I doing that? Life is too short. And then you multiply that across everybody.
Yes.
And you have this massive spend boom. And so that will dial back. But the question you're asking is the degree to which I would ask you, like, how do you see that, dialing back or not?
I mean, I think we're going to see some changes in the market shift, certainly. But I still think Kelowna, to me, has always been its own island in a sense. And I just don't think that we get impacted. We're always the first ones, our experience is always we're one of the first markets to go up when the world economy sort of changes. And we're sort of one of the last ones to go down. So our impact time is always less than other city centers.
That's right.
So I sort of feel that we're going to be okay in this. And I feel that there's so much here. And as you mentioned, there's some big employers here now, which we haven't had before.
Yes.
It used to be just tourism. And that's still a big employer, but that's not really the main reason or driver of people moving here anymore. And so I think the desirability of the Okanagan is just going to continue.
That's right. Yeah. I think the other thing that we're noticing too is just, it's the people noticing it outside. So I can remember going to the Globe and Mail and the Great Places to Work, the Institute, and speaking at a conference 5 or 7 years ago and explaining where Kelowna was. And you'd have to reference it to Vancouver. People didn't know.
Yes.
Whereas you go out there now, and I was out there a little while ago, and it was just a case of, how did you get there? Like, how did you move your job there? How did you? And so everybody knew. And it went from no one to literally every conversation where they asked you where you lived, they were fascinated by that. So
and wondering how they could do it.
I wondered how they could do it too. And is their job portable? But it was just the fact that they knew where it was different. I mean, that's really
Kelowna
changed.
isn't a secret anymore.
Not anymore.
Not at all. And I hope and I think that our mayor, our city council, I think they are maintaining the regional district, UDI. They're preserving that good quality of life.
Yes.
We're known for good drinking water and outdoor activities and a safe, good place to live. And I think we're going to be a large city, certainly by 2040. But I think that they will be able to maintain, I hope that we'll be able to maintain this great quality of life, which is what helped us get to where we are now.
Yep. I think the big thing too is just the fine grain work is going to be different. I think as you densify downtown, you've got 40-story buildings. You can't have a whole swath of 40-story buildings. You've got to have them and they've been doing that stacking back from the lake. But you've got to have green space and you've got to have open space. Like people don't have any green space, and we've got lots now, but for a growing community, we actually don't have that much, right? And so I think that's one of the big things too, is that council has been acquiring land and lots, and they've been acquiring lots on the lake, and they get criticized for that at times. But you have to kind of imagine it, and their responsibility is to think at that 20 or 30,000 people out level, and they're getting ahead of it. It's expensive. I mean, it's not cheap for them to buy these different properties, but it's going to pay off. And I'm very grateful to councils from the last, 30 and 40 years have done that too, because we do all benefit from the amenities of the parks and the lake and access to those things that you don't always have in other communities.
Yes,
and so
we're very
fortunate.
Better?
Sure. And that's going to be the fine grain kind of work on the urbanism side and the approval side. They're really going to have to shift and learn and think about things like density bonusing and otherwise, and trade-offs for things like affordable housing, trade-offs for things like daycare. That's getting to be new, and they're talking about and dealing with those things now. I know they're considering that at council. So those are going to be big shifts, that are going to be very important to livability.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that was fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing with us and just really helping us, be able to climb into your brain for a moment and see what you see and learn from you. So,
well, thanks for having me. Yeah.
So 2 quick questions. We're going to dive back to you.
Yeah.
So, and we so appreciate you taking your time. You're very busy. Sure. So thank you. But 2 quick questions. I'm going to end this on. Okay. What is your favorite song?
It's funny. I was just I love the song "Seven Nation Army" by the White Stripes, and I was just driving in here today, and they were talking to Jack White just about the nature of why is this song so universal? Like, why can they play it at a soccer match in the UK and at a US football game, and everybody can chant this? And he was just talking about the universality of a beat that it unlocks with people, because it's in English, so that is not universal, but they're just noticing it kind of taking off. And it's kind of like soccer songs in the UK or in Europe, where why does this take off? But I remember when I first heard that, we lived in Edmonton, I was driving going, this song is going to be huge. And he was joking about the fact that they didn't want to release it. The record label thought it was going to be terrible. Yeah. And I just remember first hearing it, it was one of those things that kind of unlocked your brain. And so it was just a song that I've always loved, but I'd never really researched the story, and just coming over here, he was talking about it. So it was kind of
that's perfect. I'm so glad I asked the question then. That worked.
Yeah.
And one last question before we leave you is, what is on your nightstand as far as a book? What are you reading right now?
I am just reading the book about Coach K. So Mike Krzyzewski, who's the coach at Duke, who's just retired after being the coach there for 42 years at an elite basketball program.
Wow.
Mostly it's really interesting kind of intersection of how do you coach people who come from remarkably different backgrounds. So he's at Duke, which is an elite private school. That are recruiting, and otherwise, they get some of the best kids in the world, to going to the U.S. Olympic team and coaching a completely different group of professional athletes and paying them, or them being paid. And how do you get them to work together? How do you get them to get past ego? How do you get them to get past upbringing, where they're from, and actually be a team? And so it's a really interesting book. It's a really fascinating case study for somebody who's to lead it for 42 years, that school. It's just like,
wow, amazing.
Almost, I just can't even believe the energy required, but it's just a lot of really great lessons about coaching, and that's something.
And what's the name of it again?
It's about Coach K. I can't remember the actual. It's Coach K something. Yeah, it has a byline on it, but it's just a book that's just come out recently, and it's really good one. So for people who want to learn about coaching or bringing teams together of disparate groups of people, it's a good case study.
Well, and one you can obviously relate well to when you're the CEO of such a great company. That
you can always get better at it, for sure. So it's good to read from others who've been excellent. So
I agree. Well, thank you again, and thank you all of you for joining us today for Real Estate for Real People.